Okay. Looking at the cognitive influences of learning. Okay. And then that will encompass observational learning as well. So this is what we left off with, okay, would be D, cognitive influences on conditioning. So prior to this, we had looked at the biological influences of conditioning. So we had looked at like taste aversion, natural selection, and then looking at like how a species can have predispositions. So we had talked about like dogs being trained to sniff out drugs, or dogs being service animals, things like that. Okay, so what we're going to look at here is now with cognitive influences. Whenever you see cognitive, it's going to be a thought. Okay, so cognition is thoughts. And the name you need to know with this is Robert Rescorla. This is going to be a nice to know name. Okay, you won't have to know it for my test, but it's fair game on the AP exam. Okay, so what Rescorla did, okay, is that he had concluded that the neutral stimulus or the conditioned stimulus must reliably predict the unconditioned stimulus. Okay, so actually, if you could put CS and NS, I think that would be best. Okay, that the neutral stimulus and the conditioned stimulus must reliably predict the unconditioned stimulus. And I realize I have USC instead of UCS, so make sure you have that correct. So I have a drawing here, and really what this means, okay, is that the bell must predict the food. Okay, so and I was really trying to be obvious with that when we looked at the acquisition phase, that the bell had to come before the food. So it went bell, food, bell, food, bell, food. And the reason is that they started drooling in anticipation of the food coming. If you can think of your pets, okay, that they learn to associate the uh, let's say the fridge opening with getting a treat, like a piece of cheese. Okay, so they associate those together. So they might have that anticipation, that drool. Now, if you stop giving the cheese, that's going to be extinction. Okay, so now the bell isn't reliably predicting. So he went through different studies, and it would have been something like, you know, trying to do food bell, and then an association didn't happen. Okay, so this is prediction is a cognitive process. Okay. Another aspect here is we're going to look at operant, and there's another name, nice to know, is Edward Tolman. And Tolman did something called a cognitive map. Okay, so what it is a mental representation of your environment. So you have cognitive maps. You could probably picture how to get from your house to school. Okay, and you can picture that in your head. That would be a cognitive map. I can picture how I would walk from my room to the cafeteria. Okay, that would be a mental map in my head. So what happened here is I have a cognitive map here, and what he did is he had mice that would be in this maze, and the start would be just right here where this purple is, and then the food is the positive reinforcer. And what happened is that the more times they went through this, the faster they got. Obviously, they were getting the reinforcement, but that has to be a cognitive process that they were able to memorize how to get through this faster because of a cognitive process. So that's what we're looking at with the cognitive map. The other aspect here is looking at something called latent learning. Now, we've seen the word latent before. We did that with the latent content of Freud's dream analysis. Essentially, what latent is it like lays underneath and then you demonstrate it later. Okay, so my definition here is you learn, wait, demonstrate. Learn, wait, demonstrate. So, what does that mean? Okay, this means that if you learn, wait, demonstrate, you're going to learn something and then not show that you learned it right away. Okay, so for example, and this gets more into observational learning. Um, well, one of my favorite examples is this. My daughter was about 2.5. Okay, and she was at the babysitter, and another little kid at the babysitter had like spilled olive oil or something. Okay, or the babysitter dropped something, and the babysitter said, "Damn it," like that. Okay, and so she heard that. I wasn't mad that the babysitter said that. My husband definitely had said worse. So what happened though is a couple weeks later, we were walking in, and it was winter, and Emma dropped her bear in the snow. And we walked into the house, and I remember vividly looking at her by the door. And she looks at her bear and she goes, I got snow on my bear. Damn it. Just like I picture the babysitter saying. Now, of course, I laughed, which is positive reinforcement. So it would increase her saying that again. But that would be a good example of latent learning. She didn't repeat it back right away. She observed it, listened, and then used it in the correct context at a later time. Okay, so another example could be I like the example of driving. Okay, you probably learned that a red light means stop, okay, long before you started driving. So you didn't demonstrate that knowledge until you actually had to drive. Okay, or you probably knew how to turn on the car, but you didn't demonstrate that until you actually drove. Okay. So the insight learning, and this should actually, yeah, that's right. Okay. Insight learning is when you have a sudden realization to a problem. And this isn't necessarily taking place with any type of reinforcement at all. Okay. What's happening here is you just figure it out. Okay. So with insight learning, this would be something like you're working on a math problem, trying to figure out the solution, and then all of a sudden it comes to you. I know a really good example is typically if I'm thinking about, oh gosh, what's that actor's name? What's that actor's name? And you're trying to think about it, and then you're walking later and it randomly enters your head. So I have a light bulb here. Insight learning is kind of that light bulb moment. So this is going to demonstrate that we have cognitive processes that will be part of that learning process. Now, we also have to look at the types of motivation, okay, that are going to underlie operant conditioning. So I know when I had first taught about operant conditioning, we want to think about what is generally considered a desired versus an undesired stimulus. Now, we know that we have these internal and external motivations that are going to influence that, and that's going to be largely cognitive. So, for example, I could assume that ice cream is largely going to be a positive reinforcer. But what if somebody's lactose intolerant? Then they're not going to be. Okay. But when we look at motivation here, okay, we do have intrinsic motivation, which is going to be internal. And I have in the picture here like interest, pride, curiosity. So if we were to look at people interpreting what they consider to be a positive reinforcer, for example, some people may study and then the reinforcer is that they enjoy it. Okay. And or they enjoy the learning process. Okay. So they don't need an extrinsic motivation because they already enjoy it. Then you have so an intrinsic motivation would be you do like if you read a book because you enjoy it. The positive reinforcer is enjoyment, okay, or is interest. I'm assuming a lot of kids take psychology because it is naturally interesting or they're curious about the human mind. Okay, so that would be an intrinsic reinforcer. Okay, we also have extrinsic. Okay, so I am not going to be completely oblivious here that you study so you can get a good grade. Okay, that would be an extrinsic motivator. That, I go to work so that I can get money. Okay, I'd love to say that I would still continue to work, even if I didn't get paid, but I have bills. Okay, so I guess I could look at if I won the lottery or something. So you can have both intrinsic and extrinsic reinforcers or punishments. And there is something here that is really intriguing, and I'm going to give you a minute to copy this down. It's called the over justification effect. So, what happens here is that if somebody already enjoys something, okay, so if I found reading, and I'm going to go back to an elementary school example. If I found reading enjoyable in elementary school, which I did, okay, the enjoyment would be the positive reinforcer. Now, let's say, okay, somebody created this program called Accelerated Reader, which I'm not sure if you ever did it, but what Accelerated Reader was is that you got points for reading. So I would read a book, I would find out how many points it is. I would read it and then I would take a test. And then with those accelerated reader points, I could like buy something, like a little trinket, a little prize. So here's what happens because I already enjoyed it, the accelerated reader could actually decrease my intrinsic motivation. So I would justify that I was reading it for the points rather than because I was interested in it. Okay. So if you start looking at what a big push right now in English has been choice books. Okay. Not that I'm forcing you to read a specific book, but that you get to choose. And that's because it's that intrinsic motivation. If you are that extrinsic can really decrease it. Um, okay. All right. So any other questions? Okay. Does anybody need me to go back for anything at all? Okay. So this one here, I need you to star, highlight. Normally I would have this on its own day, like if we were in normal times. Okay, but looking at observational learning and Albert Bandura. So star, highlight, whatever it needs to do. This is a must know name. Okay. So Albert Bandura is really the revolutionary person that changed psychology. And I don't say that lightly. So I had talked about how for 4 decades we had Watson and Skinner dominating psychology. It was all the environment, it was all behavior. Well, Bandura is the one who came along and had done this experiment on observational learning. And what this experiment is, okay, is that learning occurs by observing and imitating models. So, what that means is that there's no associative learning. Okay. There's no reinforcing. It's essentially monkey see, monkey do. I observe something and then I imitate it. Okay. So, again, learning occurs by observing and imitating models. There's no reinforcing. And this is showing a cognitive process. So, with this study, he opens up the door for other people to come in and look at cognition again and really brings it back to the forefront. Okay, so super important. He's actually my favorite psychologist. Bandura is. I just think the power of observational learning is so tremendous. Okay, that like I model the behavior, and then like my child is going to imitate that. And we also are going to look at him with theories of personality. We look at him with therapy. So a lot of different things going on with Bandura. Okay. This will also be called sociocognitive or just cognitive learning. So when we look at the sociocognitive theory in the future, this is going to we'll come back to like, oh yeah, this was the Bobodal experiment. Okay, which will make sense in just a second. And it's sociocognitive because you need your social environment and you need cognition, which is thinking. All right. So I am going to show you now his actual Bobo doll experiment. And this will make sense to those of you who are in class that I have that weird clown in my classroom. Okay. This is going to put that clown into context. Okay. So here's what you're going to do you're going to write down Bobo doll experiment. And I want you to summarize and explain the significance. Okay. So I want you to summarize and explain the significance. So I am going to go ahead and start this and then I'll make it larger for you.
Segment you're about to see is taken from an early experiment on learning of aggressive styles of behavior. Uh,
Can you hear it? Okay. Just want to make sure I have my headphones in. Okay. Let's see if that's better, if it's a little quiet.
for modeling. Children watched a filmed adult perform novel aggressive acts toward a inflated doll, and the physical aggression was accompanied by novel, hostile remarks. We later measured how much of this modeled aggression the children had learned just by watching. Now, the measurement of learning of aggression uses simulated targets rather than
Okay, so what he's just going to go over like the justification. So essentially, what happens here is that he set up a study that you had experimental and control group, and all kids went in and just played in this playroom. Okay, then they come out, and the experimental group is going to watch a video of an adult beating the Bobo doll, which you'll see here.
New York. The model pummeled the doll with a mallet, flung it in the air, kicked it repeatedly, threw it down, and beat it.
So now what's going to happen is the kids who are in the experimental group are going to watch this, and then they're going to go back and play, and they're going to observe what they do. The control group does not watch this, and then they go back and play. But we're going to watch the experimental group, a couple kids.
It was once widely believed that seeing others vent aggression would drain the viewer's aggressive drive. As you can see, exposure to aggressive modeling is hardly cathartic. Exposure to aggressive modeling increased attraction to guns, even though it was never modeled. Guns had less appeal to children who had no exposure to the aggressive modeling. The children also picked up the novel hostile language. The room contained varied play materials, and children could choose to play aggressively or non-aggressively. The children devised new ways of hitting the doll. Now, the object of interest was the novel aggressive acts, not punching the doll. The children in the control group who had no exposure to the aggressive modeling never exhibited the novel forms of aggression. Here's a creative embellishment.
It's my
The
favorite.
doll becomes a weapon of assault.
The doll becomes a weapon of assault. Okay, so dramatic. All right, so this is probably a study that will stick with you. But what I would like you to do right now is I'd like to give you a minute or so here, okay, to summarize and explain the significance. Okay, so I'm going to give you about a minute. I think I only have one more slide after this. Why don't we just start by summarizing and then we'll talk about the significance. So go ahead and do that. Okay, so what we look at with summarizing the study is that these kids, okay, observe the model. Okay, so if we want to try to use the vocab here, they observed the model who was aggressive with the Bobo doll, and then they imitated that behavior. Okay, the significance of the study is what we talked about earlier, okay, is how it there's no reinforcing, no associative learning. It brings cognition back to the forefront. Okay. Now, what has further research shown here? Okay, and what this is there's something called mirror neurons, and this is relatively new research. When we look at mirror neurons, okay, they are frontal lobe neurons that are responsible for mirroring what people see. Okay, so the theory is that they will fire when I perform an action, such as yawning. Okay. Or if I see somebody else yawning, they're going to fire. Okay. Now I'm trying to fight yawning because I'm talking about yawning. Actually, I'm just going to yawn. Okay. So a mirror neuron, this really explains empathy. I have the saddest story ever. My daughter, she was going into fourth grade, I think, and we were at recess at summer school, and I teach elementary summer school, so she was in a different class. And I was out at recess monitoring, and I look over at the monkey bars, and well, not the monkey bars. It's like the one pole. It's just like one bar that you can like do flips over. Well, she had tried to jump down and her shorts got stuck on the side. So she was hanging upside down by her shorts. And it is the saddest thing ever. I like tear up every time I think about it. She's fine now and she laughs about it. But she was literally just hanging there and these kids were staring at her as she was hanging there. And then I had to go try to help her and she actually did hurt her leg because of the way that she fell. But she was so embarrassed, and I knew she was going to be embarrassed. So I felt that embarrassment just like she felt the embarrassment. I wasn't embarrassed by her. I was embarrassed like it had happened to me. That is going to be a mirror neuron. Okay. And this enables that imitation and empathy. And the saddest thing about the whole scenario was when she said, "Mom, I said, somebody please help me, and nobody helped me." Oh my gosh, it's so sad. Okay. So, but I'm sure there are some of you out there. Okay. If you were to see a person trip, that you might actually blush because you're embarrassed, like alongside and with that person. Okay. If you think about seeing something funny, okay, and they do something funny, you may feel like that happiness or that humor because of mirror neurons. Okay, so if you like feel sad, okay, when somebody else is sad, or feel happy when somebody else is happy, that's going to be those mirror neurons. Okay, they're super intriguing. Other examples too, it kind of explains with food, like when somebody's hungry and you see somebody eating. Okay, your brain may fire when you see somebody else eating, just like you're eating. Okay, so super cool things there. Now, the last part here with observational learning is looking at the influences on learning. And they can be pro social, which is another way of saying being helpful. Okay, so if like you probably have some good habits from your parents, so maybe your parents like to volunteer. Okay, so you've observed that. Now you imitate that. You like to volunteer. My all these little toys that kids get, like I rake, but they have little toy rakes because the kid wants to help rake. They're observing the raking and want to imitate that. It also can be antisocial or negative and detrimental. So here's an example of pro-social behavior: helping do the dishes. Okay, and then here I want to preface by saying I love wrestling. I really hope my kid wrestles. Uh, but this picture just makes me laugh so much. So I had looked up like kids fighting or something like this. Okay, and this picture is so great. So the kid here is definitely more intense than the kid who has the Elmo shoes on. The kid, I guarantee that this other kid has actual wrestling shoes on. The kid in the Elmo shoes is done for with this wrestling. But looking at the aggressive behavior. And again, wrestling, yes, aggression is good in that regard. But if I were to think about like a kid hitting, okay, seeing somebody hit and then they hit, or hearing somebody swear, then they swear, yelling a lot. Okay, that's when I'm talking more about antisocial behavior. But this picture is probably one of my favorites that we do in this class. Okay, so now what I would like to just do is talk about our uh, free response question, or I'll have you look at it. We'll talk about it on Monday, but don't forget that we do have the free response, and everything can be found in the learning folder. And with these unit resources, okay, you have your unit schedule and study guide. Okay, and the free response is going to go along with the different theories. Okay, so I'll start with this on Monday to see what questions you have. But that question can be found on page 2. And it's looking at applying Watson, Skinner, and Bandura's theories. Okay, and then so you have to explain a key finding, and then you have to explain how you could help parents overcome that. And this takes me back then to the FAST assignment. I am going to make this FAST assignment optional. Okay, but you may want to do it as part of your studying. So I'm going to tell you what parts I think will be best to do. Okay, so again, this FAST is going to be optional for your class because we have 4 minutes left in class. Okay, but if you wanted to complete this, I'm going to tell you which parts I think would be best. Okay, I would skip this here, okay, part A and part B. Part C would be identifying biological versus cognitive. I would encourage you to do that, and you can check your answers. I just have to add them to the key. And then these parenting scenarios are going to be very similar to the free response. So you could do this and then check the key. All right. So that's what I'm going to have you complete. So I'm going to hang out here for the next few minutes to see if anybody has any questions. Don't forget, I will have a quizzes up. I'll have the Quizlet posted, and we will be reviewing in class on Monday. All right. So take care, everybody, and have a great week. I'll see you Monday.
Bye, Miss Severson. Have a good weekend.
Yeah, you too.